Podcasting is so dang hard that you should start one today. Or if you already have an existing podcast, here's why you need to keep it going. Hello, and welcome to episode number 60 of the Subscribe Me show from subscribeme.fm, where I talk about creating membership sites and online courses, how to make, market, and monetize digital content, the world of WordPress, and tools, techniques, and tips that you can use to create a long-term profitable online business. I'm Ravi Jayagopal. I'm the creator of coolcastplayer.com, a pretty yet powerful audio player and podcast player plugin for your WordPress site. In today's episode, I'm going to give you a few reasons for both why you should and why you should not start a podcast. So you know how in shows and movies and stuff, somebody walks up to the main character and says, "Hey, I have both good news and bad news." And the main character always says, "Give me the bad news first." So that's what I'm going to do here as well, because, you are the main character in my show, and this entire podcast is about you. All right, so first, reasons why you should not start a podcast. So if you think about it, creating audio is actually easier than creating video, at least most forms of face-on-camera videos, because if you're going to be in the video, then you have to think about your clothes and hair and makeup or shaving or lighting. Are you going to do it indoors or outdoors? If you're going to shoot the video outdoors, are you going to use just natural sunlight? And if yes, then if you shoot for over an hour or two, then you'll see the lighting differ. The final output, it's going to be like, one of those stop motion videos where the shadow moves as you shoot the video because of, clouds and the position of the sun itself changing as it sets. All of the outdoor noises that you may have to consider, because I don't know about you, but the second I walk into my backyard to shoot a quick 3-minute video, or even just turn on my mic to record a podcast, it feels like the entire universe conspires against me. And my neighbor, who probably hasn't mowed his lawn in weeks, suddenly comes out of the blue and starts his lawnmower. If that doesn't happen, another neighbor is starting his leaf blower, right? And yet another neighbor down the street starts doing some construction work and starts banging on stuff. All of the kids magically come out to play at the same time, especially the cute little ones with such high-pitched screams that only your dog can hear it. Of course, your mic picks up everything as well, including the stupid AC unit in your own backyard, which you forgot to turn off, goes off all of a sudden. So think about how many talking head or face-on-camera videos a typical person creates over their lifetime. Probably not too many, at least not, most of us, unless we are doing the occasional sales video or the occasional Facebook Live or stuff. So the number of people doing video is absolutely going crazy day by day, thanks to Facebook Live and Instagram and Snapchat and whatnot. But still, overall, if you think about it, that's still a very small percentage of people creating video on a daily basis or weekly basis. Now, there are those casual screencast and how-to videos that are actually easier to produce, like in a documentation video or in a how-to tutorial where you're trying to show somebody how to use software or something. Not necessarily your own product, but general educational technical type videos. Those are actually easier to produce than a typical podcast. One of the reasons being the long-term commitment that a podcast brings. So don't just compare audio to the much harder selfie videos. We are going to compare creating audio or a series of audio files, which would be called a podcast. We're going to comparing a podcast with the mostly written word type content like blog posts and Facebook posts and Instagram posts and Medium posts that you would normally create. So podcasting, in spite of what people would have you believe, is actually way harder than compared to most other forms of content generation. And I'm not just talking about the actual creation and publishing part here. I'm talking about the overall impact, at least the immediate impact and the short-term impact that a podcast would have to your bottom line in the short term. Again, don't ever do the mistake I just committed, which is use the word short-term and podcast in the same sentence. So for a typical half-hour podcast, it takes me about, let's say, about 3 to 4 hours, right? Start to finish. And that's with my pretty fine-tuned process, which I've kind of honed down. And it's about to get even better as I get ready to turn over my podcast editing full-time to my 14-year-old son, Rohan, who is now pretty darn good at audio editing. And he has been professionally editing and managing podcasts for about 3 clients this past couple of months during summer. And by the way, he has his own podcast, which is a movie and TV review podcast. Check it out at zombiesheroes.com. Now, most people may not be able to afford or may actually not want to afford the fees associated with outsourcing their show's editing because it can be expensive, like $10 to $50 per episode, depending on who's doing it. If somebody like a summer intern, like my son Rohan, does it, it's probably going to be cheaper than, say, a professional podcast editing outfit. And even if you say, let's say, only $20. For 4 episodes a month, that's $80 for a podcast that's probably not going to be making you any money for a while. And then throw in professional hosting for about $10 a month. And then if you outsource show notes writing and uploading your content and creating a blog post and all that stuff, you could easily end up paying about $200 a month in total for about 4 episodes worth of work. That's about $50 episode. So most people I know end up trying to do it all themselves, which would easily take them about 3 to 5 hours. And it'll probably even take a little bit more time if your show is longer than half hour, or if you have multiple hosts, or you have a guest on your show, and so on. The more layers of complexity you add to it, the more time it takes to publish the show end to end. So there's the preparing for the show, like what are you going to talk about? What's the main topic? What are the bullet points for what you're going to talk about? Figuring out the different segments. Then you're on the day of the recording, you're actually the setup for yourself, clearing out things, make sure you don't start recording on the day when your whole neighborhood is doing their lawn. And if you have a co-host, then the collaboration and discussions between the 2 or 3 of you, then the actual recording, then getting all the media together and putting it together, the intro, the outro, any ads and calls to action. Then you edit it, then you mix it to make the audio sound really great, and balancing of audio, between the different audio segments and volume control of the different co-hosts and guests and stuff, writing the episode subject, the description, getting together the episode artwork, creating the ID3 tags. Then you take the final version, then you upload it to the podcast host and set it to publish. And if you thought, whew, that sounds like a lot of work, then guess what? I have even more bad news. Because simply publishing it on your podcast host is just one major piece of the puzzle. There's still the work of creating a blog post for this and formatting the content, deciding what your show notes are going to be, and then writing the show notes. Is it going to be a word-for-word transcription, or is it just going to be a nicely written summary with bullet points that gives a really good idea of what the show is without spilling all the beans, so to speak? And even after you do that, it's still not over. The hardest part still remains: promoting your show. Yes, you'll have to actively market your podcast, just like you promote your website or product or service or online course or lead magnet or webinar. You have to market it constantly. It's not something you can do for a little bit and then, it now picks up and the momentum keeps it going. No, you have to market and promote every single episode. So now comes the dilemma. If you have an online course for, say, $27, and if you decide to run paid ads to drive traffic to your landing page, okay, then let's say you have a funnel which offers a lead magnet to get them into your list. You send them emails, and finally, some percentage of them will convert and buy your course. So in this case, you can actually track your ROI, return on investment, for this campaign. So let's say I drove 100 people to my website at 50 cents a click. So I spent $50, brought in 100 people to look at my offer, out of which, let's say, 5% went on to buy my course at $27 a pop. So I spent 50, made 135, a profit of roughly about $85. I say roughly because, obviously you have other expenses like credit card processing fees, somebody to manage your ads and customer service and tech support, forget all that. But I can still calculate a reasonably tangible return on investment. And even if I lose money, even that I will know, right? Because I can track that as well. With a podcast, the hardest thing to do is tracking your ROI. Whether that investment is just your time or also your money or also your effort, in most cases, it's going to be all three. You cannot easily tell right now, as I record this, how well your podcast is working for your business in a tangible way because it is a long-term game. Podcast is more like your retirement account, right? It's not like a bet on the stock market. So it's more like a retirement account that you won't be getting a penny from anytime soon. There's always going to be those who have an existing audience, like an existing list or a lot of fans on social media and so on, that they can leverage for the new podcast and instantly shoot to the top of the charts. But for most people, like you and me, you won't have an existing list, at least not an existing list that can always be leveraged for your podcast because your main business may be different from the podcast you choose. Again, that's a different subject for a different day. Whether you should align your podcast with your business or is it more about your hobby, it depends. So which means you really have to get creative in promoting your podcast. You have to try and be a guest on other people's podcasts. You have to create content marketing pieces that promote your podcast episodes. So that's the crazy thing, right? If you're creating your podcast to promote your business, but now you have to create something else to promote your podcast, which then promotes your business. So it's like an endless array of promotion that needs to keep going in the background. So then you need to, take out paid ads, you exchange ad spots with other podcasters, and so on. And there are a lot of ways to do it. But there isn't just one thing that you can magically do, like buy a lot of ads and track the return on investment and then tweak your ads based on your conversions. You can't do any of that with a podcast. That's because there simply aren't many tools right now to measure a whole lot of the key metrics. There are some services coming out, and Apple is supposed to be exposing more stats to their podcasters pretty soon. It hasn't happened yet. You can know the number of downloads that your episode got because your podcast host, like Libsyn, will tell you that. By the way, if you're planning to start a podcast and looking for a host, Libsyn is your best choice. This very podcast is hosted with them, and use the code SUBSCRIBEME, the coupon code SUBSCRIBEME, one word, to get your first month free. So you can know how many downloads your episode got, but you cannot know how many people who downloaded your episode actually went on to actually listen to it, or how long did they listen to it, and where did they stop listening, and so on. So the ability to track ROI on paid advertising when it comes to converting clicks to listeners to subscribers, a lot of that is not possible right now with podcasting. Which is why even big name celebrities who launched podcasts, I know of quite a few, they ended up quitting it because a podcast is a lot of thankless work. Take this very podcast, for example. This is my 60th episode, right? So I have published 60 episodes so far. And let's say I spent an average of like 4 hours from start to finish, including promoting and social and editing and everything else. So that is 240 hours of work for this podcast. Now, my episodes get pretty decent download numbers. No complaints there. I'm not getting millions of downloads or even tens of thousands of downloads per episode. I'm not there yet. But considering the fact that the average podcast only gets about 200 and something downloads, 220, 230 downloads, according to Libsyn, their the feed podcast where they talk about their stats and stuff of the average show hosted with Libsyn. So 240 hours. As an entrepreneur and businessman, I do have to occasionally ask myself, is this the best use of those 4 hours of my week? Or could I be doing something different or better with it? Obviously I could go and binge watch a few more Netflix shows, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something better compared to podcasting for my business or for my brand. So on some level, it's very much possible to feel like if I had used those 240 hours on creating an online course or improving some of my own software products like coolcastplayer.com or s3mediavault.com, or even adding new features to DApp or digitalaccesspass.com, which I'm the co-founder and co-developer of, that would certainly have had more tangible results. Like it would have surely resulted in noticeably more sales, which means more revenue. And the features that I add or the course that I create will keep selling and adding to sales and revenue for years and years to come. And once the creation process is over, I can just buy ads and track conversions and clicks and ROI, or I can recruit more affiliates who will promote the course or the product for me, which in turn increases sales and revenue, which I can then pour back into my business and take more vacations and stuff like that. But with the podcast, guess what? You cannot hire affiliates because there's nothing to sell and it's not easy to track. Like you cannot create an affiliate link. Even if you use DApp, you cannot create an affiliate link that goes on to say, if you send me a link, if you send somebody to my website using your affiliate link, and if they become a subscriber, I will pay you $1. You can't do that because there's no way to track subscriptions, because subscriptions happen in podcast apps, which is like iTunes, the app, or Apple Podcast app, or Overcast. So you can't track clicks and conversions, like converting to a subscriber, because you can track how many clicks you send to iTunes or Stitcher. You can't really know how many of those specific clicks went on to actually subscribe to your show, because you might get downloads because if you run ads on Facebook and send people to your website or to iTunes or Stitcher, you will get more downloads that day. So you might feel like your advertising is working, but you can't track any subscribers. And because if they don't subscribe, they don't follow the link to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever else you're promoting your podcast, if they don't really go on to subscribe, then they're not coming back, which means the next episode you publish is not going to get downloaded by them because they're not subscribed to it in their podcast app. So a lot of it is guesswork at this point. And with an email list, you send out an email, and within a few hours, you can clearly see the results. You can see how many clicks were clicked on your link, how many people visited your website, and you probably might have even gotten a few sales or basically a few conversions, depending on what the links were leading to. But with a podcast, it's different. People are listening to a podcast while they're out and about. They're on a run, they're walking their dog, they're doing their dishes, they're in the car going to work. And if you have a call to action in your podcast, like you will actually hear me say a call to action at the end of this episode, then the conversions on your calls to action will be way smaller than if it were sent in an email, right? That's obvious. Because when people listen to a call to action on a podcast, they're probably out and about, and they'll have to get back to their desk and to their computer at some point, which they may do hours later. People get back to their computer, they're checking on some stats or Facebook feed or Instagram likes, and they respond to a few customer emails and support requests and put out some fires. By the time, they've totally forgotten about that call to action you mentioned at the end of your podcast just a few hours earlier. So there's a lot more to why podcast tracking is so much harder right now, today, than with most other mediums. Like even YouTube gives creators such phenomenal stats. It's not the greatest, but it's way, way better than what you can get from a podcast. So the podcasting industry is still evolving, but the bottom line is this: podcasting is hard. It's really hard. Churning out content, great content, week after week, because guess what? You might have released 50 great episodes, and if your 51st episode is rather weak and boring, then a new visitor who finds your podcast on iTunes or Stitcher, when they go to your listing, guess what they're going to see first? They're going to see episode 51. So it didn't matter that you had 50 amazing podcast episodes, which took like 200 hours to put together, but that 1 week episode, the 51st episode, which turns out not so great, or you made a joke that was not so funny, or you had some weird things going on that episode. It was like you're off, you're mentally off, you're upset about something. Let's say you didn't have a great podcast episode, but that's the only one they're sampling, and you will be judged based on that one episode, and they're never coming back to your podcast after that, because they obviously, like every one of us, we judge a book by its cover, and the podcast is always judged by its latest episode. Which is why in my book, which I'll talk to you a little bit about, one of the things I talk about is why you shouldn't worry about, sticking to a schedule at any cost. I would rather you put out an episode once a month if you have, great content, rather than forcibly put together some junk just week after week, just so you can say, I put out a podcast every week on Monday without failing, I don't want to disappoint my fans. I don't want to disappoint my listeners. So I have committed to putting out a content every week on Monday. So this last week I was sick. My kids were sick or something. I didn't have time. So I'm going to end up putting out junk content anyway, so I can say I did not miss a week. No, that's not a good idea. For this very reason, like I said, a podcast is judged by its latest episode. So churning out content week after week, the research, the editing, the uploading, the creating a page for it on your website, optimizing it, then promoting it, all of that is hard work. You can write a blog post in chunks over a period of time, but you can't record a single episode over several days. You can't chunk it up because the sound quality will not even sound even or consistent. Or if you have a co-host, you can't get them to come back 4 different times to suit your convenience. Or if you have a guest, you can't get them to come back over 4 days and do the interview in bits and pieces. You can get a ghostwriter to write your content marketing pieces for your blog or Facebook post or Medium, but you can't outsource your voice. You have to do it yourself. Even if you outsource the basic research and editing, you still have to sit down and do the recording. You still have to sit down and record the interview with your guest. Now, you can go back and edit a blog post little by little, over and over again, and you can keep adding to it over time. But it's not easy to keep adding to a podcast episode or keep editing it and removing stuff and in between and inserting stuff. Technically, you could do it, but it's way more complicated than just editing a blog post and adding to it or deleting from it over time. So podcasting takes a lot of passion, knowledge, and persistence to do it long enough and well enough to build authority and influence. And most importantly, it takes a lot of marketing to get the word out and build a legion of raving fans. And now we get to the best part. Having said all of those things about why podcasting is so dang hard, I'm now going to do a complete switcheroo and tell you that those are the exact reasons why you should start a podcast. Guess what? If it's hard and complicated and takes passion and knowledge and persistence and patience to do it, then here's some great news. Most people are not going to bother to take on all that work for such little or slow payback. Most people want instant gratification. Most people want to win the lottery. They want to win at a casino. They don't care about investing money and investing time and effort, like investing in a retirement account that they can't touch for a long time. That's not how most people's minds works. And that's where you and I are so darn lucky, because not everybody else can do this. And most people will not have the knowledge or message to spread. They won't know what to say. And they may not have enough to say it for weeks and months and years together, week after week, month after month. They won't have the passion to get past the dip. You'll not get listeners for a while. You have to push through that, and you can't push through it if you are doing it for the wrong reasons. So most people won't have the patience to understand that this is a long-term game. They won't have the marketing savvy to know how to promote their podcast. They won't have the persistence to put a lot into it upfront without being able to see any immediate results. They won't spend the $70 it requires to buy what's probably one of the cheapest but best microphones, the Audio-Technica ITR 2100. I use a Blue Yeti myself and I love it. For the Blue Yeti, you need to have a much more soundproof location than the ATR 2100. So most people, they won't pay the $5 or the $10 for professional hosting. They'll try to cheap out and host the media on their own website, on their own server, on their own shared hosting server, and 50 people access the podcast, and down goes their shared HostGator account, and they get banned from their hosting account, and they don't want to pay more. They'll try to cheap out and use like archive.org, which is not meant for you to host your podcast. And they won't pay a few dollars even to buy an awesome podcast player like coolcastplayer.com that they can put their entire podcast feed front and center on their website. So if you go to subscribeme.fm right now, you can check it out, how I promote my podcast feed front and center on my homepage. So they won't get a good player. They'll use the cheap WordPress, basically not cheap, but free WordPress player, which is like a basic, very, very, very simple and basic player, which won't even look like a player if you're trying to promote your podcast as the main thing on your website. Most people won't get a player like Coolcast Player so that they can create a blog post for each episode and put the beautiful Coolcast Player episode player right at the top of each blog post, so that every single person visiting their website can quickly and easily sample their show instead of reading a long blog post. Now, I heard somewhere that there are about 2,000 blogs for every podcast, which means when you start a podcast, you are competing with 2,000 times more competition than if you were to start a podcast. So the opportunity is wide open. And while it is getting easier to start a podcast, and there are a lot of free services and websites coming up that offer easier podcasting, free podcasting, blah, blah, blah. We all know how free services last after a year or two, right? So just because it's getting easier to start a podcast doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get crazy more competition for you, because there will be a lot of people coming in with unrealistic expectations about the results and from their podcasting efforts and how much money they can make from their podcast and how much fame and recognition they will get from their show, and they'll be on CNN and they'll be on all these TV shows and they'll hang out with the rich and the famous, and they will probably fall flat on their face because podcasting is not a business model. You cannot start a podcast with the sole intention of making money from your sponsorships. Well, I guess you can start a podcast with the sole intention of making money from sponsorships, but you will be greatly disappointed. So thinking you can make a full-time living someday just from the money directly earned from sponsorships on your podcast is one of the biggest myths. So podcasting, like I said, is not a business model. It is a content marketing tool. So just like it is going to be insanely hard to make a full-time living off of just ad revenue from displaying ads on your blog, it is super hard to make a full-time living from just ad revenue from your podcast. And most people starting a podcast will be too short-sighted to realize this, and they'll quit podcasting sooner than later. From what I've heard, the average podcast lasts less than 10 episodes before it pod fades. Pod fading, by the way, is when a podcast just withers away and dies a slow, painful death. These podcasts don't necessarily shut down. They don't disappear from iTunes. They don't really totally go away. They just stop publishing new content. And over time, they'll lose all their subscribers who are previously subscribed, especially if they used Apple Podcasts app, which after a while of inactivity, it'll just drop the subscription. And listeners will slowly go away, and they'll just delete your podcast from their phone, and your show will just fade away slowly into the distance, right? So it makes sense that the average news show puts out about 10 episodes, or 7 from some other reports I've heard, before the host actually quits and pod fades, because that's how long it takes before it hits you how hard podcasting is to keep up week after week. How hard it is to keep coming up with topics, show after show, how much time it takes to promote your show, and how slowly it ends up growing, at least for most people, and how much patience you need to keep it going for the long term. But guess what? What's bad news for the rest of the world, for all those pod faders, is the best news for you and me. Okay, so that word pod fader sounds like dark and ominous, like Darth Vader. Luke, I am not your podcast host anymore. So anything worth doing is going to be hard. If it's too easy, everyone would be doing it, and that would kill the marketplace. And if it was insanely expensive, then again, only a very few could do it, like owning a plane or an island. But podcasting is one of those things which is not easy at all, but it is not expensive either. It is just hard enough and just cheap enough for those persistent few of us to get in the game. It is cheaper than most hobbies like golfing or tennis. It's actually even cheaper than most gym memberships or cable TV subscriptions. And that's why you and me and the persistent few of us who start and run a podcast are one day going to enjoy the fruits of our passion. It's not like you have to wait for 5 years before you can see any benefits. You're going to see it every week as your listenership grows. However slow it may be, you will start developing those true fans from day one. And one fan a week is still worth doing it because it is still building up to your 1,000 true fans. So one day we can all be like Tim Ferriss, who gets millions and millions of downloads. Okay, maybe we won't get millions, but tens of thousands. Right? So Tim Ferriss gets millions of downloads per episode. He puts out a book and it sells millions of copies. Product launches, charity fundraisers, social media interactions, and likes and comments. Whatever you name it, you can get a lot of it. That's what you get with a podcast, because that's what gets you a true fan following. And that's why podcasting is special. When it comes to the ability to connect with people on a deeper, more personal level, audio is second only to video. But with all the ways already invented every day to interrupt, annoy, and distract people like you and me, TV, Netflix, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, WhatsApp, Hangouts, on and on and on, and more ways being invented every day, podcasting in some ways has become the single most powerful relationship building, and I should say fan building tool that there is, even more so than video. Because guess what? You cannot be driving and watching a YouTube video. Well, I guess you could, but if you did, then you probably wouldn't be well enough right now to be listening to this show, right? So you cannot read an online article or a blog post or a PDF report when you're driving to work or when you're walking your dog or when you're at the gym or when you're doing the dishes. You can't listen to the radio show that you want to when you want to. Whatever is playing on the radio when you get into your car is what you have to listen to. Even with expensive satellite radio, you only get more channels, but you don't get the channels on demand. You cannot get a show on satellite radio to start when you're ready for it, even though you're paying a monthly subscription fee for the darn thing. You still have to listen to the shows on their clock, not on yours. But podcasts can go where no other media has gone before, so to speak. The people talking on the show, whether they're making you think, laugh, cry, or learn, they're in your ears, talking directly to you. They have your fullest attention. For the most part, you are focused in on their voice. Even if you are performing a chore, you chose the podcast yourself. Nobody spammed you with that darn podcast. Nobody signed you up for it without your permission. There was no pop-up or malware that forced a podcast episode into your ears. There was no Nigerian prince who asked you for your iTunes ID so that they could secretly auto-subscribe you to junk shows. There were no fake billing department calls or FBI calls, asking you for your credit card so that they could charge you for a podcast. Oh, wait, that's right. Podcasts are free. You chose to listen to a podcast. You chose to search for a podcast. You went out and looked for it on iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play. You voluntarily listened to it, maybe even multiple episodes. Maybe you even subscribe to it and have it automatically downloaded every week. You did all that yourself. And you got to listen to the show of your choice with the topics of your choice. When and where you wanted to listen to it. Listening to it when you simply had no other way to entertain yourself or learn something or become a part of something bigger. Where podcasting shines is its ability to indirectly impact other areas of your business, like developing more authority for you, credibility, expertise, all of this which you can use to get, like speaking gigs, coaching gigs, consulting jobs, to drive awareness and traffic to your products and services. You can sell more books, build a list, on and on and on. Only a tiny, minuscule percentage of podcasters will actually end up making a full-time living just off of sponsorships on their shows. Even with them, they're not really only doing, making money from sponsorships. They have affiliate links and they sell their own courses and they sell products and services and stuff like that. So you would be way better off using your podcast to build an audience, to build your brand, market yourself, your products, your books and services, and establish yourself as an expert and an authority in your marketplace. So no matter what the most famous copywriters will tell you, you simply cannot form the same kind of relationship and bond with the written word. At least most people cannot. Okay, we're not talking about, writing a book and becoming super famous like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling or Seth Godin. So we're talking about the average person writing a blog or a Facebook post or a Medium post versus creating a podcast. There's something absolutely magical that happens when you put on your headset, turn off the rest of the world, turn on your Apple CarPlay or Android Auto in your car, and listen to someone talk passionately about a subject that you actually care about, whether it's for 5 minutes or 10 or 30 or 60 minutes, week after week. This is why radio advertising was always so much more powerful than TV advertising, because guess what? When you're watching a show live and you get like a 5-minute commercial break, people are going to get food, going to the bathroom, doing stuff and checking their phone and all the stuff. But when you're in a car, yeah, I mean, still some people will still check their phones. They're stuck in traffic. Most people don't. Most sensible people don't. So when you're in a car and listening to the radio, that's why, it was so popular, because when you're driving, you really can't do much else, and you're locked into that voice coming out of the speaker, and you're listening to that sports show or talk show or music station, and there comes this awesome host-read ad or some other ad that grabs your attention. So take radio, the power of radio, and turn it on its head. Make it 50 times more powerful, and that's what podcasting is. There are just an infinite number of upsides to the kind of relationship that a podcast can help you build with your listeners. And that relationship should not be and cannot be cheapened by thinking about things like ROI, conversions and clicks and subscribers and direct marketing metrics. So a podcast is the biggest proof of that famous concept by Kevin Kelly called 1,000 True Fans. The premise is that you don't really need millions of followers to be successful. You just need 1,000 true fans who can make you more than successful and help you make a full-time and even an abundant living from just those 1,000 true fans alone. You don't need millions of fans to make millions of dollars. And guess what? The platform that gets you the fastest to those 1,000 true fans is podcasting. And I'm not talking about how fast you can reach those 1,000 people. I'm not talking about how quickly you can get someone to consume your message or how quickly you can get someone to take action. Like click on a link, read your email. So on a link in a social post or in a Facebook ad. So a podcast will fail miserably at all those quote unquote quickie items. But when it comes to gaining 1,000 true fans who will buy your books and sign up for your online course and sign up for your coaching program, support your Kickstarter launch, and leave you unsolicited 5-star reviews on iTunes, and fans who will follow you on Facebook and Instagram and comment on your social posts and like your post within minutes of you publishing them, that's what a true fan is. And when it comes to creating your 1,000 true fans, a podcast, which is more like the tortoise, or like we Indians say, tortoise. So a podcast is more like a tortoise than the hare. So that, my dear friend and listener, is exactly why you should start a podcast today. And I would love to give you a free copy of my paid book about podcasting titled Confessions of a Wannabe Podcast Star, The Biggest Podcasting Myths Busted and the Shocking Truths About Podcasting I Wish I Knew Before I Launched My Own Show. It is currently selling on Amazon for $7.99. And I have sold close to 1,000 copies of the same book for anywhere between $5 and $10 from my own website. But you can get it for free. All you have to do is post a link to subscribeme.fm on your Facebook feed and then tag me in your post. That's it. If you start typing my name, like even a part of it, like at RAVIJAYA, Facebook will probably suggest you my profile. So tag me, post a link to subscribeme.fm, maybe say a couple of nice things about the show, like, hey, check out subscribeme.fm, a podcast that I listen to. It's really good. Ravi is the best looking dude ever with the best Indian accent ever, or something like that. And I will message you and give you a copy of my paid book about podcasting, paid digital version, of course. Or if you don't care about getting it for free and would rather pay for it than recommend my podcast to your friends on Facebook, just go to podcastingconfessions.com. And you can buy a copy from my website, and you can even get the audio version from my website. Or just go to Amazon and search for Podcasting Confessions. And my book will show up as the first result, probably only result because not too many people have those two words in their book title. And if you already have a podcast and want some inexpensive but professional help with the editing of your show, then my 14-year-old son, Rohan, has been interning all summer editing podcasts for 3 other professional podcasters, and he wants to continue it even after school starts. So he's just going to high school now. So just email me at Ravi, R-A-V as in Victor, I, at subscribeme.fm. So that's Ravi at subscribeme.fm, or just go to subscribeme.fm and contact me from there, and I'll send you more details about his editing work, his rates and stuff. And whether you have a podcast or publish any kind of audio on your website or in your members area of your online course, check out coolcastplayer.com, which is a really pretty yet powerful podcast and audio player WordPress plugin for your website. So until the next time, thank you so much for listening. I really, really appreciate you letting me into your personal space and for listening to my show. Cheers and talk soon.
Subscribe me.fm